Genesis chapter 16, verse number 13. There you shall find these words recorded for your listening as they have been translated in the English Standard Version. This is what my Bible says. So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly, here I have seen him who looks after me." So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly here I have seen him who looks after me." And just for a little while, I'll put a tag on this text and talk on this topic. I want to talk about the God who sees me. The God who sees me. Sisters and brothers, more now than ever, people are more vocal in their expressions to let people in their life circles around them know that I don't feel seen. Sisters and brothers, this is something that plagues just about every generation, every race of people, every age group, every demographic, every gender, because sometimes we don't feel seen. Take it from me, being a sci-fi geek and sharing dialogue and commentary with people of such a cut. And we ask each other, if you had a superpower, what would it be? Or if you think you have a superpower, what do you think it is? And I said, well, my superpower is a mutant ability of invisibility. And they say, well, why you say that? So I woke up to the store and the doors don't open. I walked through the elevator and the doors start closing. I put my hands under the faucet and no water comes out, under the dryer and it doesn't start. So I think I have the mutant ability of invisibility. Sometimes people bump into me. Don't they bump into you sometimes? And sometimes people talk about me and I'm saying, hey, I'm standing right here. In one form or another, we struggle if we are seen or not. Some struggle with the idea of the things that they do, they don't get the response they anticipate. And so they express themselves by saying, I don't feel seen. God sees all of us. Whether people see you or not, whether the motion detector picks up on you or not, God sees all of us. He's a God that sits high and he's a God that looks low. Deists believe that God created the heavens and the earth and the entire material universe, but then he stepped away and left everything to deal with itself in and of itself. But that's not true. God is a personal God who loves to expose himself so that we might experience him in new and refreshing ways. Whatever your condition in life, whatever your station in life, you can rest assured that God sees you. Your friends may not see you at all times. Your family members may not see you at all times. You might go unnoticed in the workplace at times and in some of the organizations that you give your time and service to. But please know, God sees you. And I want to contend today that if nobody else sees you, if no one else notices you, if no one else acknowledges you, you have somebody that pays you the attention that you need rather than the attention that we think we deserve. We have a God who sees us. Ask one of the lead characters in this text by the name of Abram. His name has not been changed yet. He is Abram, which means father. God introduces himself to him. He interrupts Abram's course of living by saying, hey, you fella. He said, if you go where I send you, I'm going to bless you. In fact, I'm going to bless you so good, I'm going to bless them that bless you. I'll even curse them that curse you. And you may not believe it, Abram, but in you, all of the families, all of the nations of the world are going to be blessed. And so he got up from where he was in Ur of the Chaldeans and went to a place, the old preachers say, cities whose builders and maker was God. Abraham sojourned. He is the father of the Hebrews, the progenitor of the Jewish race. And we, sisters and brothers, are heirs to the promises that God gave Abraham. We're a very valuable part of the promise because we're part of those nations, we're part of those families that God promised to bless him with. And so when Abraham heard the voice of God, he was 75 years old. So seniors, that's a word that suggests to you that you're never too old for God to use you. Now don't pull out your senior saint card when your ministry leader asks you to do something. Don't pull out your AARP card when the pastor asks you to do something. When the first response of seniors like to get, you know, I'm too old. But you are never too old for God to use you. As long as you are here, God intends to use you. Well, as fate would have it, 10 years have rolled on by. He and his wife, Sarai, her name at the time, had not even come close to conceiving. And so they had the grand idea to help God out. And he added himself to the cadre of biblical families that were dysfunctional. Or you thought you were the only one from a dysfunctional family. Dysfunctional families have existed as long as there have been families. And your dysfunction that you might detest, your dysfunction that might frustrate you, in many cases is not comparable to some of the frustrations that other dysfunctional families have to deal with. Dysfunctional families in the Bible include Adam's family. Adam's family was dysfunctional because they are responsible for what we call the fall of humanity. Adam's family was dysfunctional after the fall because his children were involved in the first murder in human history when Cain killed his brother Abel. All because God accepted Abel's sacrifice and rejected Cain's sacrifice. As time went on, Noah's family was dysfunctional. They were all right in the time that they were building the ark. They were all right in the time when they were on the ark. But when God delivered them to get off the ark, it is then when their dysfunction began to display itself. Noah's family, Adam's family, but even Moses' family was dysfunctional. Aaron did stuff that he wasn't supposed to do. His sister Miriam did stuff that she wasn't supposed to do. God exacted judgment on either of them. He delivered them later, but it just earmarked some of the dysfunction that families tend to have. Isaac's family was dysfunctional because his fraternal twin sons were at odds against one another. Jacob's family was dysfunctional. There was always tension between his wives. They were sisters. And his babies' mamas competing for his attention and his affection. And when his children got grown, they started their own shenanigans, further proving that all families have a degree of dysfunction. Check out David. Lord have mercy. David's family had some dysfunctions, sibling rivalries, and even one of his sons tried to rend the kingdom from his hand by starting a coup with some of David's trusted partners. One of David's wives at the time got mad because David danced before the Lord with all his might to the point that his clothes came off. Dysfunction in families. Even Jesus Christ belonged to a family of dysfunction. His own siblings, those born to Joseph and Mary, did not believe who he really was. And it was not until after his resurrection that some of them began to come around. And so if you got a dysfunctional family, you got a normal family. We think dysfunctional. It sounds like an abnormal term or designation, but just about any family that you can name, any family that is known has a degree of dysfunction. It is here in the text that we begin to see the dysfunction in Abraham's family. Everything was all right until the time of the text when 10 years later, no conception has happened, no sign of any heir was to be born. And so as we look at this text, the text is not so much this sermonic idea about Abram and Sarai as it is about another lead character by the name of Hagar. Some people pronounce it Hagar, same person. It's really pronounced Hagar. An Egyptian slave girl that was assumed during the time Abraham was in Egypt with Pharaoh because there was a famine in the land. It seems like whenever there's a famine, Egypt is always a fertile land. And when Pharaoh had sent Abraham away, he sent him away with riches and honors, gold, with silver, with livestock, and with servants. One of those servants was charged to be the handmaiden of Abram's wife, Sarai. And so, just for the next little while, there are timeless truths that are trapped within the treasury of this text that are tailored to teach us something about seeing. Because if all you see is what you see, you will never be able to see what there is to see. I know it sounds like a riddle, but it's the truth. Sometimes our perception is limited to just what we can see. If we would be honest, we are subjective creatures. Many of us look at artwork on the wall, we only see one thing. But an objective person is able to take a step back and to see just about any and everything that is going on in that same piece of art that others see so subjectively, and some look at life subjectively. They can only see one thing. If something's going good or something's going bad. But when there's a little mixture of good and a little mixture of bad, guess what we see? We just see the bad. That's why I tell you again, if all you see is what you see, you'll never be able to see all that there is to see. And that brings me to my first point. He is the God who sees me, first of all, because God is sympathetic to our vulnerable positions. I like that. We have a God who is sympathetic. We are a God who knows that because we live in a world of sin, there is struggle, there is sickness, there is sadness, there is sorrow, there are situations that we just have to deal with in life. And when we come to church, sisters and brothers, there ought to be two things that we leave with Sunday after Sunday, meeting after meeting, prayer service after prayer service, Bible class after Bible class. You ought to be able to leave with 50% of how to cope with life. And the other 50%, it ought to be how to conquer life. I thought I would have somebody that liked that. Because life will put you in a situation where you're going to need some coping mechanisms to get you through those times. And at other times, God is trying to let us understand that we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. And so let me give you some coping mechanisms. And let me give you some conquering measures. God is sympathetic to our vulnerable positions. Here, the text says, now say, Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne those children. 10 years had gone by. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abraham, behold, now the Lord has prevented me, blaming God, from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And Abram listened to the voice of his wife Sarai. So after Abram had lived, here it is, 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram as her husband, as a wife. And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on her mistress with contempt, shade, animosity, bitterness, side-eyed, turned up her nose, looked her up and down, as if she wanted to displace her from who she was. Sarah didn't take kind of that. She kind of reminded me of Eddie King Jr. in the movie called The 5 Heartbeats, when he told his rival vocalist Flash, he said, you want my smart Flash? Well, you ain't gonna get it, because you ain't got it. And so this went back and forth between them. Hagar looked upon her with contempt, and Sarai said to Abraham, it's your fault, boo. Now, this was her idea. But see how we quickly shift the blame for decisions that we've made. May the wrong done to me be on you. It's on you. All of this is on you, Abraham. I gave my servant to you to embrace. And when she looked at that stick and saw it was positive, she been acting shady ever since. Who does she think she is? She must not know who I am. I'm from the west side of Palestine. Sarai says, may the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, I ain't got nothing to do with that. He said, my name is Paul. That's between y'all. My name is Bennett. I ain't even in it. He said, your servant is within your power to do as you please. Then Sarai dealt with her harshly. There it is. You throw shade to me, I'm going to throw shade to you. You say a 4-letter word to me, I'm going to say a 17-letter word to you. You look me up and down, I'm going to look you up and down the same kind of way. She dealt with her so harshly that the Bible says that she fled from her presence. Hagar flees from Sarai's presence. Now, I told you what Abram's name meant, father. When God changes to Abraham, it meant father of the faith, or father of the faithful. Sarai's name means princess. Now, she's not acting like a princess here. She's being more pretentious than more like a princess. But Hagar's name means fugitive or runaway. And she's living up to her name because of the harsh treatment that Sarai deals out to her. Sisters and brothers, we've been there before. We find Abram and Sarai having a little trouble with God's promise. Now everybody just raise your hand. Left hand, right hand, just raise a hand. All of us in here, you keep it out if you want to, you're still included. All of us in here have struggled with God's promise. They're trying to figure out, Cindy, how to make this, how we going to, it's been 10 years. We've been doing what we're supposed to do every week, 2-3 times a week. It ain't nothing happened. Now, people didn't live at the time of Abram like they used to live like in the time of Noah. People used to live 900 years old, but you start topping out when you got close to 200 in this day and age. And so Sarai knows that, she's 10 years younger. I'm 65. Ain't no 65-year-olds having to stay in the maternity ward. And so maybe God didn't mean me. And according to the customs of their day, and in some places, not many, those customs still exist on if a woman cannot bear their husband a male heir, he's entitled to a concubine or a handmaid servant so that he can carry on that name. So essentially, Sarai is saying, well, we gave God 10 years. I've been doing it, what I'm supposed to do, headaches, don't want to be bothered, tired, sleepy. You get there, you gonna catch up with me in a little while. I've been doing what I'm supposed to do, but still I remain childless, and it's God's fault. God is making a mockery out of my situation. 10 years go by, and so they're trying to figure out how to make it happen according to the world's customs, according to society's standards. And isn't that what we do as well when we're waiting on God's promises? Oftentimes the wait leaves us frustrated. And we try things by force, like I told you last week, rather than by faith. They decide to help God alone. Let me pause from preaching long enough to tell you, you think God needs your help. But God doesn't need your help. He appreciates our acts. He appreciates our works and our service, but he really doesn't need your help, especially when he establishes a promise. We believe God's promises, but we can't seem to figure out when or how he's going to do it sometimes. And so we resort to things that we are familiar with. Oftentimes things that have worked for other people. Other remedies, other resources that we know have proved successful for other people. Sometimes we turn to those things instead of standing on the promises of God. Now, all of us agree that in this life we got to go through. Man born of a woman is a few days and is full of trouble. We got to go through. But the million-dollar question when we're going through in life is often how long? Sarah's saying, I don't know how much longer I'm going to live. We don't know how much longer you're going to live. The clock has already ticked out on me, but it's going to tick out on you pretty soon. So we got to help God out. So we sit down and we think of ways on how we can help God along. And like Sarai, we begin to say, I know what God is able to do. I know what God said done, but maybe this is what he meant. No, everybody raise their hand. We all become scholars. We all become theologians when it comes to the mind of God. This is what God meant. And then we resort to our own measures to attain the thing that God promised us. Can I tell you something? If God gave you a promise, hear me and hear me real good. Satan is going to make sure that you're offered a substitute. Satan loves to eavesdrop. He loves the ear hustle. Your conversations with God. Satan heard the promise just as well as Abram and Sarai did. And so he gets to work in Sarai. Gives her this notion, and then he gets to work in Abram because he consents to what she puts on the table.